state of North Carolina, they've got agreements with like 3 other states that if you're willing to go into, she was in Paris for 3 years, and those are really impoverished.
Yeah.
So she did that. She just went to she was elementary school kids at Ohio State.
Oh, wow. That's like a lab school sort of?
So she wiped out, she almost didn't know long.
Yep, yeah.
But she's still catching muffins.
Oh, yeah.
She's still there. To take care of incidental.
That's great though.
So she went there, they did she made
Probably 3 tough years though.
she was just stuff. She had, like, she doesn't, I can't remember. She'd be like, I'll make it work. You know, she's just kind of, she's 23 with no difference.
Yeah.
So, no, it worked out good, but see, she was doing that, she's I have seen her see
Oh, yeah.
Inner city, or like way off the beaten path.
Oh.
So maybe just this, just the way it goes in the taxes. It wasn't in your, Rachel or Sunny Morris?
Yeah.
It's unexpensive to live in. It's not bad. I mean, it's way less expensive than this year. But yeah, she was just, they just figured out that way. They don't lose it. There's nothing worse than, you train somebody and stay in the league.
I was over last spring. Alaska's in there. Oh. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. How do you feel about snow? I'm gonna go sit back here.
Okay.
Good to see you. Well, I saw you at a few basketball games, but they don't really appreciate it if you wander across the court in the middle of the game.
Mike keeps me on the side of the
Yeah.
program, huh? Good spot.
What is this?
Anyone that's here, feel free to help yourself to food.
Oh, like the facilities. Thank you.
Just go to a
What?
form.
Oh. I haven't had one vegan pizza since we negotiated that one. Ed, I want to teach you a history. I'm just kidding, it's a mistake. I gotta say, the Quran thing on the form again. I was like, no, you didn't, you didn't. I was joking, sorry. Sorry. I just thought it was really funny, your email, you're like,
I print mine out.
Hey, Jake, are you in the witness protection program tonight? Are you in the witness protection program tonight?
I just want to press call.
Oh, Barry. I didn't know if you just.
Yeah.
Is there a public comment? I have to sign
Yeah,
in.
about 5 minutes in.
Do I have to sign in or not?
Oh, you have to sign in now.
I can see Tucker. Well, you just need to beat back the board. Like, you need to beat back the board and people rushing up there.
I'm sorry. I print mine ahead of time, so I just check and make sure nothing got
It's nice, like, and I'm like, this is wonderful. Supposed to, like, oh my gosh. It's dark.
got it.
Test. Test. Will you check with Rachel then and see if we're good to go?
Oh.
Not yet. Not yet? Okay.
Yeah, except for Ross needs a chair. Sorry? Ross needs a chair, but other than that, we're good.
Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Don't think I have any proposed agenda adjustments. Does anybody else have a proposed agenda adjustment? All right, seeing none, we'll move into our annual organizational meeting, this being the first meeting after the municipal election. I think you've all been through this before, so we have a bunch of offices to fill. First one would be board chair. Don't know who's interested in that. I remain interested, but is anybody else interested in board chair? No. Okay, I would take a nomination then.
So moved. I nominate Brian McGill.
I will second.
Any discussion?
Thank you.
All those in favor? Okay. Abstain. Vice chair? Still interested, Jake?
If someone else wants to do it, I'm more than happy to not do it, and if nobody else wants to do it, I'm happy to continue to do it. So I'm open either way.
I nominate Jake Eckert.
Thank you. I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Curriculum Subcommittee.
Hey, Brian, is there any way that we can just say, like, keep the slate the same unless anyone, and then during discussion, someone can say if they want to switch?
Well, it's hard to change a motion
Okay.
once we have it in motion, so
Okay, all right.
I'm trying to check in before the motion. So this is Mark and Jeff at the moment. Anybody want off or on?
I'm good to stay. I'm also good if anybody else wants to come on.
All right. You're okay? I'll make a motion for Mark Brewer and Jeff Wingard as curriculum subcommittee.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Policy subcommittee. This at the moment is myself and Mark. I'm happy to continue. Anybody else?
Or move.
It's usually not the most exciting committee, but okay. Take a motion then.
I nominate Brian McGill and Mark Brewer for the policy subcommittee.
Any discussion? All those in favor? No. All right, 2 abstentions. Facilities appointments. These are technically ad hoc committees. I don't imagine we want to change ship on these, so I would suggest that we keep the current alignment of Mark for OMS, Jake for athletics, Aaron for ASA, and Jeff for the auditorium. Is there a second to that?
I second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. UTC representative.
I enjoy being on that, but I'm happy if anyone else would like to give it a shot.
All right, I nominate Aaron for the UTC rep. Any discussion? All those in favor? Spruce rep.
Currently me, I'll continue to do it unless someone else would like it.
I would nominate Jack Eckert for spruce representative.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, Wellness Committee. Aaron's doing that?
I'd like to stay on the Wellness Committee. but
Okay,
Anybody else can do it.
Right. We could probably have 2 board members on that if we wanted, but I would nominate Aaron as the board rep to the Wellness Committee.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, wow, we have not had a single change. That's a first. JPD, Joint Professional Development. So this is a committee that meets 3-4 times a year with the union and staff. That's currently myself and Jake. I'm happy, but if somebody else wants a turn. Okay, I'll take a nomination.
I nominate Brian McGill and Jake Eckert for JPD.
Is there a
And I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? I abstain, change my vote, but, okay. And Stipend Committee, that's currently Aaron.
I enjoy it, but I seem to have a horrible track record of actually making the meetings, so I'm happy to give it up or stay on it.
Is that one where we could add a second person to?
Comes out of the contract, I
So it's
believe. Do you
one.
know, Shauna, is it just one board member?
I can look it up, just give me a moment.
Yeah, it meets 4 times a year during the school year, an hour after school. Like 3:30 after school.
The stipend committee is made up of 9 members, faculty, administration, and board, up to 9 members. That's all it says, so we're at.
Okay, and the only language in the policies caps 2 members from the board, so if somebody, we could send 2.
I'm just thinking if Aaron would like to stay on, but is having a hard time making it, 2 might be good that way. If she can't make it, there's somebody there.
Yep. Anybody want to step up? You want to do that, Jeff? Okay, I would nominate Jeff and Aaron to the Stipend Committee.
I will second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, so those are the committees we've had traditionally and are required by law to have. We can create additional committees. This board has not particularly been fond of proliferating committees, but we could create one if we wanted to. Anybody seeing a need for a different committee? Okay, we'll let that stand. We can always do that later. All right, so consideration of minutes. I would motion to adopt the February 26th minutes as presented. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, any discussion, corrections? All those in favor? And the March 9th minutes, sorry, March 5th. I would motion to adopt the March 5th minutes as presented.
I second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Warrants. I would motion to approve warrant 18 and payroll warrant 18. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, I would just note, I think Rachel did a nice job. We did add the values and the board goals to the left, so we'll leave those for a few months and see what we think about that. We now come to public comment. Is there any public comment?
Apologize for the pace.
No rush,
Take your time, it's like.
no rush.
I'm quite a joke actually now. All right, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Bill Libby. Been a resident here in Orono since 1985. Kids went through the school here. Granddaughter's now starting the cycle all over again, so that officially means I'm getting old, very old. A couple things. I am unable to go Thursday to the meeting that's talk about the facilities and all that. Had some questions and some concerns, just things that I'm not sure about, and I'm not sure who can answer them. The potential size for the new auditorium, how many seats is on the table?
We're going back on that right now, but somewhere between slightly over 400 and 460.
Okay.
Some of which will be removable to allow for some other options like an orchestra pit, but
Okay.
max seating is going to be somewhere between 400 and 460.
Okay. Now, the other night, I got to go to the concert at Houck to watch the K through 3. Great time, great performance, funny, just, it's good stuff. On Mean's website, they list Houck at 520 seats, and that was bulging at the seams. On the assumption that we would put the elementary concert, I assume, in our new auditorium if that got built. I went to school in Vermont a long time ago and went to Castleton State, so don't hold that against me. 520 doesn't fit into 460.
So, believe it or not, we've actually had a lot of conversation about this specific concert and fitting in. I think the plan is that 7 of that 520, 70 were students sitting in the bottom right. And we are looking at actually putting a projection screen in the band room, which is behind the stage. So students can sit back there. It'd be a little bit easier for teachers to supervise them as well, but they can still be fully part of the concert. And that takes you down to a point where we could actually, if we do the 460 end, where we could fit that concert in there.
Okay, but they obviously wouldn't be in there.
They would not, yeah, there were some students sitting on the wings of the stage, which
Yep.
we could still do, and
Yep.
some of the students would, yes, be in the band room
Okay.
immediately behind with big screen TV and.
They'd rotate around, they wouldn't be the same.
Right, as they go, yeah.
Suits in the band.
Yeah, in an orderly fashion, as they always do
Yes.
at 6 and 7 years old. That said, of the other events that we potentially could hold there, obviously graduation would never be able to fit in there. Class night, I mean, I don't know, again, I've been off that for a while, haven't had a kid graduate in a while, so I wasn't sure what was available. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, it's certainly a talking, we need facilities and we need some help with a lot of things. There's a lot of things there that we do need. What's being asked for is a significant amount of money. We're not patching a roof, we're not, putting a, patch in the driveway. It's a significant amount of money. And I certainly hope that from the auditorium side of it, and I wish this had been done 30 years ago when I first moved here and it didn't get kicked down the road till now. But here we are, and, we're probably staring at something if it's gonna happen. Hopefully there's been a lot of thought put into the building as far as any potential rentals, potential income, those kind of things. I mean, when a building like that is dark, it doesn't do anybody any good, but you don't want to wear the building out, so fast. So I don't know what your plans are, for that. I didn't know what thought had been put into, obviously we can't, to build a $14, $15, $16 million facility to hold 3 concerts and 2 plays and a show choir. That's kind of like hitting a tack with a 900-pound hammer.
So, I mean, a couple thoughts on that, working backwards. So the auditorium is third out of the 4 projects in terms of size. The first 2 are educational needs in ASA and the high school.
Yep.
So it's less than a quarter of that overall amount. Second point, just in terms of thought, I mean, I hope I can assure you that we have done due diligence. Jeff's been the chair of that particular group, but we've had half a dozen meetings just since the 1st of January, not to mention some meetings before. We've had teachers and experts from the community in there. We have assembled a list of about 30 events we can imagine holding in there. Graduation's the biggest. You're right, we're not going to get in there. We'd have to have 2 or 3 tickets per kid, which I hate to do for graduation. But the next biggest one is the K3 concert, which we can fit in barely, but we can fit. And then there's a long list down from there of the all band and all choir concerts, which we can fit. I was just at the all band concert last night. But there's this long tail of, we now have a ukulele class, which is pretty popular. Those are not gigantic concerts. We have plays, middle school, ASA. ASA does have a show choir right now. They may have, it's not hard for me to imagine plays coming down. lots of educational uses too. We just had a guest author come into town, all those kinds of, so we have a list of about 30 things that we're looking at.
Yeah, and I honestly think that if in fact that does go up, that's the tip of the iceberg. I think there's a lot of things. I just hope that there's, like I said, we get this building built and we go, hey, this is great. Now what are we gonna put in it? How busy can we keep it, and what's too busy and what isn't busy? So I guess what that leads me to is this. Obviously it's, facilities cost money, schools wear out, everything, and there's many of us that don't know that. What I struggle with is this. Back in August, granddaughter, first grader this year, new teacher, fun time, neat part of our lives. Second year teacher, I don't know, making 30-something thousand. We were told that, and I'm assuming this is correct, that she needed help with supplies to make her classroom work. To be able to have the kids do the classes that they have, take care of things they needed to do. If we're gonna ask the town for 14, 50, whatever, how many $1 million it is, I have a hard time then looking at a teacher that, saying you're making 33,000, but you gotta come up with an extra $500 on your own. Now, several of us pitched in, never mind doing that. I've done that forever and I always will. But when I see that amount of money, and then I see that, especially in grades K, 1, 2, 3, I know the needs down there are just all over the planet. It's hard for me to fathom, nodding my head to a new, lot of new things, but we got a teacher that has got to reach in her pocket for $300, $400, $500. And I didn't know, and again, not looking for an answer, just, I kind of look at that and I struggle, looking at that number going, we're taking care of something that we probably need to. But then we have teachers that are asked to do things. I don't know about you, but at your workplaces, I assume they buy you copy paper and pens and things like that. They don't ask you probably to purchase much for your work.
Right, so,
Thoughts?
So we do pay more than 33 for, even for starting teachers. We're paying a bit above the regional average.
Okay. I was just throwing a number out there.
Yep, I don't know, so I couldn't if I wanted to, but I also, don't want to single out one individual. So I can't say, but there's budgets for supplies. So I can't speak to the particulars, but we don't expect teachers to pay out of pocket for classroom supplies, whether it's textbooks or paper or even extras, markers or whatever. So that we have a regular budget for that. And the other thing I'll say is, as a district, we have always chosen to invest in teachers first, which I think is critical. I have a lot of teachers in my family, and I know teachers are underpaid by any metric. But at some point, it does catch up with you when you always leave the facilities for next year. And I know you have been making that point as well.
Yep.
So we have to continue to invest in teachers, but I personally, we'll see what the town thinks, but I personally think we've reached a point where we do have to put something into facilities as well.
Mm-hmm. Like I say, when I look at, there's no way that I can look at a teacher and make it, pick the number, pick it 30, and you also have to purchase materials. And what my understanding is that there are teachers that do not have enough money to purchase things they need in their classroom to make their classes work. If I'm wrong, then someone needs to correct me.
Don't think that's accurate, but,
Okay.
I don't know the particulars of the situation you're talking about, but I know we have money that we budgeted last year, for example, in anticipation of having a new classroom, having to establish a new classroom. So I'd have to research the particulars of what happened with that as to why someone felt they needed to do that and that there wasn't money available.
Yeah, and again,
There is a limit to what we have available, but it should be more than ample to establish the classroom.
Okay. And like I say, I'm at that point where I don't need, for me, I have no problem giving money to kids. I think that's money well spent. When I look at that, it's a concern because that's what was posed to us, and I hear consistently that teachers have to reach in their own pockets for things for their classroom. That's a message we hear all the time. And if that's true, then that's where I struggle with $14, $18, $20 million bond, and a few $1,000s may be able to correct a problem. I just think it's, if what I'm hearing is true, and if I'm wrong, I need to be corrected, but that's not what I'm hearing. So.
Give you all the information I have, and
Okay. Yep. like I say, that's basically it. As always, thankless job. My dad was a school board chair for 20 years, so I've heard all the arguments and all the late nights, and I'm used to it, so appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
Yep.
And I know there are probably other people, in fact, I've heard from at least one other person who can't make Thursday, so we are certainly accessible by email and would like people to reach out to us with questions. We're in that phase where we're trying to get information out about what we're doing, so questions are very welcome. Okay, any other public comment? Next up, acknowledgements. I don't know, maybe we should give Mark a chance first. Since we always start on the left end, or we can start down at the student end. Yep. You can save it for your report.
I think we might as well just put it all there, because we have a list of things.
Okay.
So I would like to acknowledge all the people who've served on all our various facility subcommittees. It's been a huge amount of work throughout the process. It's all coming to a head this week. There's been a lot of people, some of them in this room, who've put in a lot of hours and still have quite a few hours still to go this week. So thank you to all the people who've done that, and then just kind of urge people to keep participating all the way through to the end. We've got a few more events this week, and then still some other stuff to go till we get to June. So thank you.
Anything, Meredith?
Yes. I'm not going to steal the thunder of the music concerts. I'll just leave it there. I'll let other people give the details. But I just want to acknowledge Brian and Eli for being at the polls all day long on voting day, just to provide information to the public about the facilities project. That was a significant undertaking, and I think it was important to have that presence there, so I appreciate that.
Let's see. I'll just acknowledge that the middle school jazz band is going to States on Saturday and wish them good luck.
I will leave some concerts for you too. So I am just going to acknowledge the ASA chorus concert that was last week.
Yeah, the ASA concert was amazing, as usual, and Jessica Moore, who puts in all the work for that, but also all the teachers and administrators who came, and they're all there supporting the kids. It was amazing.
So I'd repeat what everybody else has said. I often talk about kids and the accomplishments of kids. I had the opportunity to kind of be a fly on the wall week and a half or 2 weeks ago at a regional training where we had teachers from RSU 26 participate but also present. Their presentations were very well received by teachers from across the Penobscot region. It's really a testament to the kind of soft skills and qualitative learning that are going on in this district, that other districts really wanted to hear what Orono had to say about teaching our kids great behaviors, great attitudes, and how we institutionalize that as a district. So it was really super to see.
Can I go back and say also Literacy Night was a total success at ASA. They did a great job. That was a lot of teachers getting together to put that together also.
And since no one mentioned, the all bands concert last night was just fabulous. It was a great showing for all levels, fifth grade up, and jazz band, pep band. So it was just really fabulous. Commend Jen Nash and Mr. Terrace, the student teacher who's been with the program this year, and also all the students.
Anything anybody forgot?
We also have to acknowledge our ASA principal, Dr. Ackerman, for being such a good sport at that K-3 concert and actually donning a cow costume. That was there, and Nick Butler, our PE teacher as well, but he's a veteran in the concert donning, costume donning at concerts. But I think the kids thought it was really cool to see their principal willing to do that. So
I don't think I had a choice, to be honest.
Next up, we have superintendent report.
So a few things. First of all, I know we're going to mention this peripherally a couple of times tonight, but want to just highlight, especially for those at home tuning in, this Thursday night we will have the Facilities Community Forum at Orono Middle School Gym, 6 p.m. We hope to have a lot of the community there to hear the latest updates on the facilities planning. As Bill was asking some questions tonight, lots of details around all aspects of the project, and an opportunity just to ask questions and provide some input. And we're going to close with just taking the temperature of the people in the room around, the level of tax increase that this might result in, and what the community kind of feeling around that is from the attendees. So an important night. We hope to have a good, diverse group there. I gave a handout in your packets or at your seat tonight of the schedule for this Friday's Professional Development Day. So we have a number of things happening that day. In the morning, we're beginning as kind of two groups. ASA is going to be working down at ASA on mainly science and social studies curriculum work, right, Mr. Ackerman? Did I get that right? Science, social studies, yes. And then up the hill, the OMS, OHS group will be doing some social emotional learning time together. And we have a group working all day on some special ed training that they need for restraints, safety care training. And then after we finish that first 2-hour block, we're going to have a session time together to do a couple of things, entire group. One of the things is to give the staff an update on facilities work as a whole, and that'll be a good opportunity to give them that information and get some reaction. And then we're going to break into a mini U format. You can see the schedule of events there. We have, 6 or 7 sessions during each of the 3 rotations. Lots of different variety there. So I'm pleased. It's going to be a great day of learning. And you guys have Brian and Mark coming to do the board member meet, discuss session. So, but there's lots happening that day. Also, do you have a comment about that?
No.
Okay. Want to give you an update on where we are with the international program coordinator advertising process. When I last spoke with you, we indicated we were going to advertise, and we did, for an interim to fill the position for the balance of the school year, and then we were going to advertise for a permanent replacement in that position. We did the advertisement and did some interviewing, and upon just talking further about the situation and the way an interim position is perceived by potential students and agents as not being, it seems very transient to them, and they don't have a lot of confidence in placing students with an interim kind of person in place. We decided to change gears with that, and Reg and the team at the high school have really come up with a nice plan to finish out the year with high school staff picking up pieces of the responsibilities, so that there will be someone that's a permanent member of the high school staff that's working with potentially new students, also working with host families, working with the students who are here now. They have a really good plan for that moving forward. And we are preparing to put an ad in this weekend's paper, and it might already be up on Serving Schools for the long-term replacement that we hope to bring on as soon as possible after we can do an interview process. But as we talked about before, shifting that position to be more of director of admissions and having more responsibilities for local recruiting and local outreach, in addition to the international program coordination. So that's where we are with that and why we've made that change. I just wanted you to know that that's happening. Those are the 3 things I wanted to mention. Do you have any questions?
Is this a 12-month position or a 9-month position? Is this a school year position?
It's a school year position, and there is a stipend with it to compensate for some of the after-hours work. And we're still looking at how the compensation will look with this reorganized position. And, we need to finalize that, because in addition to the previous position, we've had some stipends, sometimes just with the coordinator, sometimes we've had an assistant if we had a certain number of levels that was stipended. So it is school year position, but the stipend compensates for work that happens some right after the close of the school year and in preparation for the new year with host families.
Okay,
And,
thank
you know, students coming in.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions, comments? Next up, we have principal reports. I'll just follow the agenda, which starts with Heath.
All right, good evening. I did have to start and point out something I just noticed, I thought of. We have Mr. Ackerman who dressed up as a cow. Last year I was the Grinch in a green onesie. That leaves Mr. Rulin, has yet to dress up as something, so I'm curious to see what you do. Oh, okay. All right. Gonna be pretty quick here. I did want to acknowledge a couple of things. One thing that's been kind of quiet is our chess team won the state championship at the Cross Center, which is pretty impressive. And we had two players that were within the top 3 for the state. So hats off to them, very proud of them. Something that's not mentioned in my report, because we just got information on it yesterday, is we did our annual Pennies for Patients. Our student council leads that. This year raised a little over $2,000 for a school of 178 students. That's a lot. We do a little competition between homerooms, and Miss Bishop's class raised over $600. So very, very proud of that. I wanted to make sure I said something. And finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about the have it right there, second item, OBS Indian Island visit. Again, that's our Operation Breaking Stereotypes. The name itself kind of speaks for what it does. Currently, it's Indian Islands, us, and then Old Town. I hope in moving forward, I've talked to Miss Bishop and Connie Cutter, who lead this group, that this might be something that maybe we can branch out and do with VZ or Glenburn, some of our other neighbors. It's amazing that we can be so close but be so different, and they do an amazing job with that program. That is it for me, unless you have some questions.
Any questions for Heath? Nope, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Darren?
Well, it's been a busy day. I did want to start off with recognizing the quiet efforts of so many ASA Adams staff. We've had some staff members this year who have suffered loss or illness, and it's amazing how this ethic of care just happens. It seems to happen organically in the school. People are suddenly creating food trains and cards and everything you can imagine. So I'm just being generic in this, but I think it's important to realize that's pretty much a key element of our culture. Moving along, in regard to vision of academic learning, I'm proud to say that on March 7th we had our Arts and Literacy Night. It was very well attended, ran from 4:30 to 6 p.m., and students set up a variety of literacy activities. We had the author Lynn Smith, children's author, and illustrator Jamie Hogan arrive. On a side note, it was kind of interesting for me. I met a couple, clearly retired, who I'd never seen before. And of course I introduced myself and they said, oh, we come every year. We come from Canada. So just the idea, they said this is a cultural event. This is one of their stops as they visit Maine every year. So I thought that was rather remarkable. I should also mention, in terms of professional development, we talk a lot about literacy, and I did want to recognize the efforts of Allison Woodard, who is our literacy coach, and she arranged for us to have a visit by Dr. Sharon Greeny to help our staff work on word work. That's high-frequency words for the most part. Fits in very well. Again, we're looking for a continuity of instruction approach. I could get into detail, but I know we have a lot to cover tonight. So I will only say that I can now, I don't get the cow outfit, but I do get this. All the students signed this, so that's why I'm running late today from the show choir. That's where I was. So marvelous job. It was terrific. Any questions? I can sing if you'd like. No kidding.
If people want to see our show choirs, it's, it's next Tuesday, right?
Next Tuesday
Right.
in the OMS gym.
Yep, and that will include ASA, I think, right?
It will.
Yep.
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 All right.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, and Reg.
Thanks.
Everyone. I'll be brief. A lot of the things on here are pretty straightforward. I want to acknowledge the One Act play. I know a couple meetings ago I mentioned just the process this year, which was in the fall. A group of students wanted to have a student-directed play. We went through a process of choosing a director, and it was a student-led play this year, and I know there were some ups and downs through the process, but they went on and took first place last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, at the regional competition down at Lawrence. And so I just want to acknowledge them. They go on to perform this weekend. I've got my dates off by a day. I think it's the 22nd and 23rd down at Ellsworth. So they've done a great job. I want to acknowledge Rachel Sear, who's been the adult in charge for these guys, but really was very much just student-generated, student-led, and is really proud of their performance. I also want to acknowledge the OTO hockey team. They ended their regular season on a little bit of a rough spot. They lost their last 2 or 3 games, but they did go on and win a couple of playoff games, and so to return to the state championship game was really a huge accomplishment. So I want to acknowledge those guys. What I didn't include, but I want to mention, was our Winter Carnival was last week, and it really was a lot of fun. I want to acknowledge Heidi Clark and Kim Emerson, who are the advisors, and they worked closely with the student council just to come up with things that were really low or no cost, minimal disruption, things like student DJs at lunch. We brought in a big speaker at lunch, and a student would bring in a playlist, and so I think students enjoyed that. We were able to have the show choir perform their whole set for the entire school one afternoon. We had the senior faculty basketball game in front of the school on another afternoon, and so I think students just really had a good time, and it was again, just speaks to just our school community, student voice, student leadership, and it was a lot of fun. And I also wanted to mention that I didn't include, Heath reminded me, but our chess team competed in the championship also 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago. And our coach Rick Jelly, we've won 2 state championships the last 2 years, and then came in 3rd place this year. I know there's some great players coming up from middle school, so our chess program is really in a great spot too. And so Rick has been coaching that for the last few years and done a great job. That's about it. I mean, I know there's other stuff on here. One little professional development I didn't include. Our alternative ed teachers, Cammie Carter and John Hawley, attended on Friday. It was a statewide, the first time it's been hosted, but I think it was at Bonnie Eagle. They hosted a statewide alternative ed conference, and by all accounts, that was really worthwhile. Cammie and John presented on our program, and that was well received. So I should know also, coming up in about 3 weeks are the MEA, our science augmentation for juniors, and then on the 9th is our SAT for juniors.
Any questions?
But I just want to say that I have a 6th grader who during Winter Carnival said, I can't wait to get to high school so that I can do all that stuff too. So it seemed like it was a great job.
Yeah, it was fun.
And not to break the inclusive school spirit, but did the seniors or the staff win?
The seniors won by a fair amount. No, there's the coach, Coach Goodall. Coach Goodall. A fair amount is all relative.
Some controversy here, I see.
Going off the 6 points, and I did not empty the bench to win.
but it was like 12 to 6. And I should comment, we had almost 20 teachers who volunteered to
great.
play, and so to play in front of the school, I mean, the gym was as loud as any basketball game this season, so.
I heard there was a dedicated rooting section for the faculty.
Yes.
Yep,
Yep,
great,
so it was good. It was a lot of fun.
good. Any other questions? Thanks.
All right.
We now have the student report.
All right. I think some of this has already been hit on, but there's the One Axis coming up. Specifically, more specifically than what Mr. Rulin said, Orna performs at 7 p.m. on Friday in Ellsworth. Show Choir States is also the next weekend, so not this Saturday, but a week from this Saturday at Lawrence High School. Staying in the theme of the arts, there was a band concert last night, which was really awesome. The middle school jazz band especially was impressive. Not sure I've ever heard a middle school group that sounds that good. There's also the orchestra concert coming up tomorrow night. And athletics, spring sports are starting up. We had a student compete at nationals for the national meet for track and field events. So that was pretty cool. And then just, oh right, we had a few students attend a scholar athlete dinner and won some scholarship money. And then it was also World Language Week 2 weeks ago, I believe. And we had a student who won a video contest with the Foreign Language Association of Maine. There's a video contest throughout the state where students make videos and submit them. So,
The organization is called FLAME, which is the language, like the World Language Teachers of Maine.
And then, what? Oh, apologies. Yes, Show Choir Extravaganza, that was already mentioned, coming up next week, next Tuesday. And then juniors had a college night a few nights ago, which was good to see them get started on that. And then all the seniors are getting all their college decisions back, so it's an exciting time for that at the high school. I think that's it.
So we're going to take this moment just to acknowledge our student board representatives for their service over the past year. And would someone be as kind enough to take a photo? Because we just want to give a shout out to these guys through our social media. So if you guys would come down front and do this. Usually, last year we had the board come down and take a picture with them. Thank you. So first of all, we are going to present you each with a certificate of appreciation, and it also serves as your documentation for your hours. So, Katie. And also just a memento, we want to give you this journal just to continue your wonderful kind of thinking and impact at the next level, and give you a place to just record your thoughts about that as you move to the next thing. So we appreciate your work with us this year. Come up and just stand with them.
Smile, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Nice.
All right, great, thank you.
Guess we can just add to that, we had a record number of applicants for student rep for next year. And we'll be, Meredith and I will be meeting, and we'll have some people for our next board meeting for that. All right, we're on to discussion items. First up is the PDT drawings and estimates first review. So Meredith and I have got to sit with all 4 committees, and we know what's up, but this is really the chance for the board members to learn what's up with all the other committees. So
to begin with, I just want to, I know that Mark, Jake, and Brian got this today, but Aaron and Jeff, there's a slightly revised overall sheet. Just want to give you just a little bit of adjustment today, just for your use in the meeting. So, do we want to just have each
Yeah, maybe.
committee member, maybe just to set this up for the public? We've had received feedback from PDT, our architect team, last week that was scheduled to be received, and we have this week to react to it, make decisions about scope adjustment, additions, deletions, changes. Of course, principal among all of this is looking at the cost estimates and making decisions around what we feel like needs to be adjusted at this point, or removed, or added. And each committee met to kind of look at that in depth and study it. Yesterday, the auditorium group and the ASA group met, and then just this afternoon before this meeting, the OMS, OHS committee, and then the track and field committee met. So we want to give each chair just a chance. We asked each committee to discuss the information and indicate to the board, if you had to make reductions, what are the 2 to 3 areas where you would point to as potential places to do that? And then ask groups, although this one was less probably successful in the discussion, what's the right amount for your group's kind of overall cost based on all this information. So I think what we have is a report from each committee as to how they ended up that discussion. So, Jeff, you started us off yesterday. No, Aaron, yeah, Jeff started us off. Do you mind starting?
No, that's fine. Okay, so we've been talking about, are you starting?
No, you're starting.
Oh, okay, good.
I said we're almost sitting in the order that we need to like.
Yeah. So we've been having a number of discussions about the auditorium, about right-sizing the auditorium and uses for that space. And like Brian addressed earlier, we've come up with a pretty long list of current uses. We've also brainstormed a list of potential uses, some revenue generating and some educational and community uses for that space. The original sizing estimate provided by PDT was somewhere in the area of about 600 seats, and we've gone back and forth down as low as about 300 seats, and then we're sort of hoping we're hitting a sweet spot now in the area of roughly 450, but as Brian discussed, depending on the final seating configuration, could be in the low 400s to about 460, including a number of flexible seats that could be moved and removed to allow the space to seem more intimate, or to provide opportunities to have an orchestra pit or some other kind of events in there. So our discussion yesterday with the committee, and then all of the fine arts and performing arts faculty members that we could get in one room at one time, seemed to indicate that we're on the right track. Trying to add a few more seats was probably good, particularly if we didn't compromise the size of the stage and the performing space. And we talked about potential areas for trimming that. We've already trimmed quite a bit. You know, we've taken out all the extras, taken out all the external extras, such as landscaping, things like that. We've reconfigured the washrooms to make them fit into one area so we don't touch into other areas of the building, and we don't expand the scope of the project. The potential, the stage size has been adjusted multiple times, so we now have a stage size that seems adequate for our performances, but not extravagant. I was personally particularly concerned about that, because I didn't want to have a great space to watch a show and a show crammed into a small space. So that seems, the stage in particular seems right-sized, even as we continue to discuss seating and things like that. So our final bit of time that we spent yesterday together was looking at where else could we possibly trim, and so there are some sort of associated spaces. Perhaps we could do some modification to the lobby space that's proposed. We've already shrunk the lobby down from PDT's original proposal for having this lobby ticketing area. It's sort of like almost a gathering place, or a community place before you enter the auditorium. We've taken that out of the plan, I think in 2 iterations ago. But perhaps we could do a little bit more trimming to the lobby if necessary. We've also talked about self-management of some of the interior spaces and looking at the cost of some of the equipment packages to see if there's potential savings there based on equipment that we own or expertise that we could employ from the community. So I don't know how much savings we would realize from any of those because we've already cut the low-hanging fruit. All the easy stuff is gone. Yeah, we do have a continuing concern about how to make a large space seem more intimate for some of the smaller performances, but we don't want to make it so small that we can't have our performances in there. So that's our concern at this point. Are there any other questions? Or I didn't address the financials at all. We're down to 4.3 million. Originally, that was the original PDT estimate was much, much higher than that. The board goal was 3.5 million. So I think we've trimmed enough to be reasonable, but we haven't achieved the original board goal of 3.5 million.
Any questions for other board members? This is basically our one chance to learn the whole project before we have to represent it on Thursday night. So feel free to ask questions. Okay.
And the updated page I just gave shows the auditorium number with the with 41 additional seats from the 419.
Right. Yes.
So it's the 460 seat cost. So that's what is different on that section compared to yesterday's cost was on the 419 seat.
Right. And okay, and we had, so in the equipment line reflects the estimated package cost from
right.
PDT.
We haven't
right?
changed anything with that. We did talk with them today and have a few more answers about that.
Okay. I'd also like to acknowledge the work that many of the committee members have done in reaching out to other schools, reaching out to the university, doing a lot of research to figure out what size is necessary. So we didn't start from nothing and decide to build an auditorium. We looked at comparable facilities, kind of soup to nuts, from community centers to school facilities to university-sized facilities to see what we'd need. So I think we've tried to be as comprehensive in our view as we could.
Erin, you want to give us ASA?
Yeah. So ASA, I feel really lucky with what we had to work with and where we went with it. I think what we ended up with is going to be like have a comprehensive and really impactful outside visual. Like you'll be able to see right away that there was a big change made. There's going to be, you know, with there'll be new siding, so that's included now. So that'll be like just right away you can see that something happened. There'll be an addition on the front that will really have a big impact on the safety of the school. That's where all the administrative offices are going to move into that, like right across where the breezeway is now. There'll be an addition there. So right as you come in, there'll be a vestibule that will be blocked off, so you will actually have to speak with someone before you're buzzed into the building. And then, so the administrative offices will be right there as you come through the front door instead of sort of going down that hallway. And then the other big thing that will happen is that right next to the gymnasium, there'll be a cafeteria space. So they'll be separate, so there'll be the gym will be open for more times of the day and not have to do that quick change all the time between lunch and PE. And the big thing that, like, we had to have new kitchen space. The kitchen is really inadequate now. So right beside the cafeteria, there'll be a new kitchen there. And then where the kitchen is now in that area, we're hoping to convert that into a new music room. So then that can free up that stage area that right now is serving lots of other purposes and has a lot of storage, and the music classes are taught there. So I think like it'll be something that you will see right away where the money went into the school. You will be able to tell the change in the safety of the school, and it will also really affect how day-to-day operations happen at the school. So it sort of hits all those major areas that I think we were looking for in the change. So we're at like 4.4 or 4.5 right now. And we've made cuts. We've tried to do some efficiencies all around, but we're right at where we wanted to be for the board goal. We're a little below where the board goal was. So yeah, that's where we stand. Any questions?
One of the things I would add is something important that is being gained in this project are some support spaces that are sorely needed at ASA around some special education programming needs and other support program needs that are currently meeting in a corner or a closet or, you know, itinerant based on what hole is available that day to tuck into to serve these students. And so that's a really important gain from that front addition and from some of the space that's freed up by adding that addition to be able to have a place for programming that's adequate. And also parking lot upgrades.
Yeah, and I wanted to add that, like, Sharon fought to have the shower and things there, which I think will actually make a big impact for some of the students during the day too, having a place where if something happens, they can stay at school and continue with their day.
Any other questions or comments for Asa?
I got a few questions on that. Just one, for the repairs under the self-managed, is that 150, is that for the siding? And is that a replacement of the siding, all of it?
That is full replacement of the siding.
Okay. Did we ever get that?
We have a quote.
Okay, but did we get, oh, never mind, lost here. Second, under the parking, is there a reason why some of it can't be self-managed?
I think the thought there is that they've asked that the area in the back where there's going to be all the construction stuff, that they're going to do that part. That was just like the PDT's suggestion. So we would do the front of the school, but where they're going to actually have to have all their construction equipment and stuff, they were saying that they would prefer to have that in the.
Okay. And then the last question is there a reason why we can't self-manage the renovation of the old kitchen space?
This is something that we've talked about a lot, and it was actually on our list of if we need to get lower, that we should do. The concern there is because there's like the gas lines and all those things that are going on in the old kitchen that would have to be taken care of, that it might be, people would feel more comfortable if it was part of the bigger project that way. Right. But I've been sort of saying that same thing.
Great, thank you.
Anything else? All right, Jake, athletic fields.
Yep. So our group settled on what I would call the base package, which was an 8-lane track with space and equipment for jumping events, the throwing events, javelin. Inside that space would be a grass competition field for both football and limited soccer, some soccer games there. Also, gravel driveway leading up to it. The cost of those items was just under 1.4 million. PDT had recommended to us other things such as new LED lights, new restroom and concession building with hard plumbed restrooms, also concrete pads, sidewalks, and walkways. By cutting those things, we were able to cut $632,000 off that original price tag of just over $2 million. We feel that those are things that we can either pay as we go or possibly fundraise for, things that we can add after the fact. Our thought was if we can just get the track and the space in between it, we can add things on as we go to make that space better. But, that's the base of what we would need to get started.
Any questions for Jake?
Jake, I just had a question about storage of equipment and stuff. So we would continue to use or renovate the existing storage buildings there in the short term?
Yeah, use, not even renovate. That doesn't include any renovation money for that. As you look at the map, the aerial map here, it's that white building right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, yep, so
Okay.
there would be no changes to that at this point.
Okay, and like the little garage, the track stuff is kept in that, that's, like, all that stuff stays, so we still maintain our ability to have, you know, not trucking that stuff. Great.
Anything else? All right, and Mark with high school.
Okay. We had we used our full hour and a half today and then some as a subcommittee trying to figure out what we wanted to bring forward to the board tonight. I guess the first thing I'll say, and it's been said multiple times already, but it bears repeating, is I think this subcommittee had the most difficult of the 4 jobs by far. I do think that we as a board pretty grossly undershot the number there, and I don't think that's entirely our fault. I think that's, again, as Meredith has pointed out, a factor of what we had to work with from PDT when we made this. The middle school, high school had by far the least amount of detail, and so we did what we could with what we had. Turns out that I think we undershot the target quite a bit. So we're sitting there with an intended target of 4.9 million, which would be, in my opinion, virtually impossible to meet without failing to do things that are really high-end needs at the high school and to a lesser extent the middle school. That being said, we had a pretty wide-ranging discussion with a bunch of diverse views this afternoon, to say the least. I think there's a recognition, not unanimity, but a recognition, pretty widely shared recognition in there that it would be, as much as all of these items you see before you represent real needs at the high school, that it would be very difficult to come forward with all of them at a price tag of 7.1 million. That being said, there was also a pretty widely shared reluctance to really cut any of them, because again, everybody recognized most, if not all of the stuff on here is really needed, and in fact, some of this stuff dramatically undershoots need. For example, the $174,000 self-managed cost for the Library Learning Center is just a drop in the bucket of what's needed there, and everybody recognizes that. So with that being said, Meredith and I and Brian as well kind of pushed as the clock ticked down. We said, well, okay, we're going to put you all on the spot here, and we're going to go around and say, if you have to pick 3 things we're going to make you cut 3 things. What are going to be the 3 things that you would cut? And people ranked them, but we didn't record for whether it was their first, second, or third choice. We just, every time somebody picked something, it got a check mark. And what came back, the top 3, and was by far the consensus for the first thing that would go would be the renovation of the current steam room to turn into space for the central office. That got 10 hash marks, so 10 people had that on their list of 3. And then there was a tie for second place with 6 each, although I'll add a caveat to that in a minute. There was a little bit of jockeying at the end. But after the original ranking, tied for second on the list of things that would go if they had to, with 6 votes each, was the Orono High School Office Guidance Entry Renovation Project. Got 6 votes, and then the Library Learning Center also got 6 votes. So that cumulatively adds up to around $700,000 that would come off, which again, if you look at the numbers, still leaves us a fair amount away from what the original board goal was, but again, in my view, that original board goal was too low. But that's obviously a decision that we can all discuss. The caveat I would say is after we ranked those things and we had a whole bunch of discussion, there was some support, not insignificant amount, for eliminating the 4 NCAT classrooms on there, but there was also some very passionate support about keeping those and that being a good investment in the future. particularly given our enrollment projection growth over the next 20 years, and also the possibility of space for our core program. Some people very strongly believe that that needs to be brought back on campus, so there's that. There's also a couple of pretty strong opinions about regarding the kitchen cafeteria, whether the current kitchen could be renovated, whether the cafeteria could be something less than, you know, kind of the old, I don't know what the three categories were. There was light touch,
renovation,
and then you know, whether or not we could go with a little bit less on that. So that got some discussion. I don't think there was, I mean, I don't think after that discussion anything changed in terms of the 6 rankings, but I would say that I wouldn't want to say that this is unanimous by any means. There was a fair amount of difference of opinion in that room. And there were a couple of people who weren't there today because of other commitments, and if they would have been there, that might have introduced even more difference. I wish I could report to you, okay, the committee reached consensus, this is what they want, this is what they'd take out if they had to. I can't do that. What I can give you is where we ended up, and that's where we ended up. So at that, Meredith and Brian were there as well. They're certainly obviously free to add anything they wish, and then answer questions as best I can.
I mean, I agree, unlike all the other committees where I felt like there was a pretty good consensus. It was all over the map, and I think part of that was because people were coming from different places. Some people were trying to find millions of dollars in cuts, and some people were trying to find hundreds of thousands of dollars of cuts. And that ultimately is going to be the board decision about what level of cuts we're looking to take. So I think I don't regret the way we did it, but if we had a different sequencing where the board gave them a number they had to cut to, it might have changed the conversation. The only other thing I'll add this later about the middle school, but let's go ahead and do questions first at the high school. Any questions for Mark about the high school?
Was there anybody there from the central office?
Meredith was, and Sharon were both there.
Yeah, I find it interesting, everybody voted to get rid of, like, that would be the top thing they'd get rid of because it doesn't actually impact.
I believe Meredith actually had that on her list too.
Ben did as well.
Ben did, so.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we have to, if we're gonna do any renovations, we have to do something with the central office. It has to have a new home. I don't think it can stay in the trailer anymore. I just,
2 years old is going to die on us. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, you know, when you talk about low-hanging fruit, that's what all the committees have referenced at some point. Because, you know, we've already pulled those out into self-manage, we feel like those are things that are easier maybe for us to accomplish on our own at some point. They're not tied up with a big giant building, you know, to think about how do you take that out? Would you ever get a chance to put that back in? And I think the thinking around some of that is that it's easier to imagine that we might be able to circle back around to some of these projects at some point, but it's going to be hard with the debt we're taking on in the next, you know, few years. And this will come up again when we talk about the capital improvement plan under the budget discussion tonight. But, you know, I do agree that the central office is reaching the end of its life, and we might have to look at leasing space off-site, or you know, coming up with partitions if we have an empty steam room, coming up with partitions to create kind of a makeshift space for a while. Or if the middle school project gets funded by the state, if we are able to pursue that, that space might be, you know, tied up in that. So I think the high school office is something else that's doable, and the library doable on our own at some point on a different scale. So maybe that's a flawed approach to the process, though.
Could be.
I mean, yeah, it does get tricky because, as you say, once we have our bond payments coming in, it's going to be a lot harder to find an extra $200,000 for maintenance. But all things to discuss for the board. Other questions or comments for Mark?
I had a question about the NCAP classrooms. So, are we in a position where we have an immediate need tomorrow to have 4 classrooms?
No, so long as we don't look to bring core back on campus. Yeah. That's not to say that we couldn't use them. I mean, certainly Reg talked about needing a space for robotics, for example, but Reg, you know, believes and said we have enough space right now for our classroom space. We could need some smaller spaces. You know, along the same lines as Aaron talked about it, or Meredith, I think, mentioned at ASA, originally, some of these were in the high school plan. Many of them might be out at this point, not all, but some of them would. So the space would get used, but in terms of an immediate need, no. On the other hand, I would say, as Brian pointed out in our meeting today, getting 4 brand-new classrooms, you know, for $900,000 compared to the cost of some of the other things seems like a relative bargain, but.
Now, our projection is that we're gonna bring in 100 new students over the next decade.
Reg, you know, presented that we could handle 50, for example, without a whole lot of problem, but if we got to 100, then we would certainly need the space, some space, whether it would be 4 or 2. I don't know, but again, if you were going to do 2, you could see on there 2 is costed out at 600, right? Isn't that what it was? 610. For me, I would not be interested in doing 2. It would seem to be silly if we were going to do any. I think for another 300,000, we get 2 more. So for me, it would either be 4 or 0, but.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, can you tell me a little more about the band instrument storage area? I mean, that's sort of the big price tag on here, so.
It's a big ticket.
Yeah, what's makes that so high, and why is it, like, no one voted to lower that at all, so what's included
One
there?
person did. I can say that for sure. It was definitely his first choice. It's a big space. It's has to accommodate a lot of kids. It needs a lot of space for storage of instrument stands and chairs and practice areas. There's a lot going on in there, which is why I think the cost of that is going to be higher than, say, a typical classroom. Obviously, it's much bigger and there's more going on. But I mean, I agree that's a big number. For me, and this is something that Jeff's committee, which I attended yesterday, made pretty clear, was that if the performing arts center, I mean, the band room and the new chorus room are projected right, you know, kind of right behind kind of the performing arts center, and it would, if we're going to do a performing arts center, there's a whole lot of advantage to having the band and the chorus right there. I mean, a huge number of advantages, and as they pointed out, and I would agree, it would be almost silly to do one without the other. So, I mean, if things were taken in isolation, you know, maybe I would be more inclined to say, well, the band, it could be, you know, we're okay where we are, although we really aren't, but we could make do. But I don't think we can for a couple of reasons. One is the new Performing Arts Center, but 2, also we need the current band space if we're going to do the things we want to do for the cafeteria. This is one, I think, for me, what I found not really frustrating, but challenging about this committee is there's just so many different moving parts that if you do one thing, it has implications for a whole bunch of other things. And they're not really separable, even if you'd want them to be, which is a challenge. But that's the reasoning behind that.
I mean, both the band and the choir room are dominoes, because if you don't move the band, you don't have a way to expand the cafeteria and kitchen, because they're expanding into the old band room. And if you don't move the choir room, you don't have the steam room space opening up. And even if we're not immediately capitalizing on the steam space, that effectively becomes new educational space. So the band room is creating a bigger cafeteria and kitchen, and the choir is creating space at some point in time that we can take advantage of for breakout space, educational space, or getting rid of the 40-year-old portable.
And if you didn't do the band room, then you wouldn't have additional space to put kids for concerts, which means you wouldn't be able to fit some of the shows. So, I mean, there's just a lot of different pieces to it.
Yeah, I mean, I know ASA broke into 2 fairly nice pieces eventually. It was very connected, but the high school still has all these moving parts.
So can you just, like, I'm trying to picture, so there's actual, like, the new spaces that are sort of additions that aren't there now?
Well, the band.
Yeah, maybe that would.
I brought a few extra maps.
Yeah, the band room is new space. I got to find my map here. Band room is new space. Chorus room is new space.
I think, Jeff, you have it, don't you?
The hallway in between kind of the band and chorus and the cafeteria is new space. Then obviously the Performing Arts Center is new space, but that's not part of this. And I believe that's it for new construction space. Am I correct on that? Band room, music choir, that hallway.
It's the whole space between the old cafeteria and the current locker room gym complex. So that courtyard that fills in is the new construction. But as we just said, by that new construction, we're enabling the cafeteria kitchen to the left and the current old cafeteria kitchen, but expanding. We're also opening up that space down in the middle school wing. So those are, they're not new spaces, but they're newly available spaces, which obviously saves money not to build the, we were at one point looking at building a new cafeteria and kitchen. It's obviously much cheaper to reno existing spaces. Any other questions or comments? Maybe while people are digesting that, I'll just throw in for people who are listening. You may have noticed we didn't say a whole lot about the middle school, and we didn't say a whole lot about state funding, so I just wanted to, this has been pretty consistent for a month or two, but I wanted to recap that for people. We are putting in a few very high priority repairs in this project, but we have a list of repairs that are still category 1 for the state, things that are like ADA, American Disabilities Act, or life safety issues that we believe we can get funding from the state under a program called the Revolving Renovation Fund. You can get up to $1 million per school. That fund is tapped out, but the legislature right now is actively refilling, looks like, knock on wood, refilling that fund. So we have left a suite of repairs that we believe could qualify quite easily for that to tap into as soon as that fund becomes available. And in a similar vein, slightly longer time frame, there is hope that we're going to replenish the major construction fund. A lot of people think of that as the new school fund, but it can actually be renovations instead of new schools. And we have been advised that we have a fairly good chance, mostly because of the age at the middle school, of being highly competitive for those funds. So we are, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. If you fix up the middle school too nicely now, it's going to be harder to qualify for the funds. So we very much have a plan to pursue state funding, major construction funding, to do a major renovation of the middle school when that becomes available. And there's starting to be talk about that. I don't know that that's going to happen this year in the legislature, but that definitely conversations going about the need to replenish that fund as well. So we are going after state funds, and that's the plan specifically around the middle school. Any other questions on the high school, or really any of the 4 projects?
I just wanted to emphasize what Mark said. There's a whole lot of synergy between the pieces for the auditorium and the OMS, OHS part of it, and I think we've done as good a job as we can up to now working independently. So it's kind of like one of those puzzles where you gotta slide one thing and get another thing. I'm not sure, I'm not sure what else we can pick away around the edges. That's really been our tough decision the past meeting or so. Yeah.
I just, one thing to kind of just put out there for your thinking and to simmer on until Friday when we have another discussion about the right size of a bond. We have our current bond debt that will be expiring in 6 more budget cycles after, so next year's 1, right? So we have 6 more budget cycles of that debt. So after 6 budget cycles, we have retiring debt. And if there's something in here that we say, this is something that we can take a wait and see approach on, and when that debt retires, can consider something to fill that debt, because, once we have looked at the possibility of, could we combine that debt with this new bond to kind of even things out for 20 years, starting whenever we start. But we've decided that we can't do that. The nature of that particular debt has very favorable terms. It's a QSAB loan, which has very favorable interest payback terms, and it's also tied up in Glenburn, also has some of that debt. So we really need to leave that debt intact as is. But it goes off the books after, I forget the year, but it's 6 more budget cycles. So that's something just to consider, the implications of that.
And this starts to get very technical, but there's, depending on who we use to sell our bonds, there's different options. If we go with the main bond bank, they have a pretty rigid structure and it's a front-loaded. So you're paying more per payment up front than in the back. But as Leo reminded me today, there are other bond selling groups out there that have different rules, and they were able to do some customization of payments. They had a similar situation where they had a kind of a step where they had one other bond that was trailing off, and they were able to arrange their payments around that other bond. So I don't know if we can do that entirely for 6 whole years, but we may have some flexibility about having a ramp up in payments 6 years out too. If not with the main bond bank, I don't believe, but some of the other options we have. The town, for example, goes through private. They basically go through Wall Street. It's a municipal bond. They still get an excellent rate, but they get more flexibility out of doing that. So there are some options we have as well. So any other questions? So we have Friday at 5 o'clock set aside to start, to finish any hard conversations. I don't know if the board wants to do any more conversation about right-sizing the bond or cuts or anything else now, or wait and get the public input and leave that for one gigantic conversation on Friday.
Do we know where we're looking at? I know we got this sheet right here, but this sheet is not reflective of, like, for example, the cuts that the group I'm working with made, or possibly Jeff's or Aaron's. So do we know with the recommendations, if I'm correct, every group has a recommendation financially except for Mark so far. So where are we sitting with those 3?
So, Aaron, we have not taken anything off for Aaron's group. I think that group feels like they are at a point where it would be difficult to take something out unless they're really compelled to by the board. They're in under budget, and they feel like they're at that point where.
They're two very separate blocks as well. I mean, there's not pieces.
Together.
Yeah.
And the PAC, I got some questions answered today that I need to feed back to the committee. I don't think one of their options is really workable, of the sound equipment package reduction. There's a longer explanation for that, but that's kind of the short answer. And the lobby package is not something we've explored. It's pretty undesirable in my opinion, so I think we need to talk as a board as if that's something we want to direct to have happen. So I haven't taken anything else off of those 2 other than what we have done, what you've seen. I took your groups out, and I took the top 3 vote-getting areas off of that committee, just based on what he shared tonight, which is kind of, tentative still. That puts the overall number at $16,640,164.
And our goal was 14.2, right?
14.4.
14.4.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, 14.2.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So we're still 2.2 over goal. No, 2.4.
2.4. No. So, and that's primarily caused by the OMS, OHS really under kind of forecasting what the level of need there really was. We've said that over and over again, but that really is the tough one.
Yeah, no, I agree.
I guess one other thing I will add with that, now that you've thrown that new number out there, I mean, and this is all in some ways based on kind of thinking I've done since our meeting ended at 4 today, is, I mean, an easy way to get that, what is it, you said 16.6, is that what you're at? An easy way to chop about $1 million off of that would be to remove those 4 classrooms. But the more I think about it, the more I think that would be short-sighted. And I almost think, that was in my list of, I can't remember if I left it in or if I took it out, but it was on my list of 3, and I think I left it there ultimately. But now that I think about it, I mean, I did throw a number out in that meeting today of where I'd be kind of comfortable. It's kind of where we are. And with the classrooms in, I think we don't need them now, but it might be a good idea to have those. And then that, at least there's the discussion about the possibility of core coming back up, if that's something we want to explore. So, I mean, I'm not trying to color anybody's judgment. I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, what really resonated with me is what Meredith said about we have to look at things that if we don't do them now in this bond, we're never going to be able to afford to do them on our own, and the 4 NCAP classrooms fit into that. We're never going to be able to, you know, come up with enough money on our own to do that. So, you know, we kind of have to think about, you know, it's the same thing with the track. We're never going to come up with enough money on our own to replace the track. I mean, the town, or the communities tried that already, right? And it didn't work. So I think we really need to focus on what are things that we're not going to be able to do through our budget or a couple of years of setting aside money from our budget, and take advantage of those things now in this bond, and, you know, hopefully do the smaller things down the road.
One of the things that I feel we are missing at the high school and middle school is space for the same thing that I mentioned at ACES, support spaces, that we are just out of space. And we have we have 2 spaces that if we were to go forward with this project as taking off those 3 areas in the high school that were the top 3, and if we took off the NCAP classrooms, we have 2 spaces that are freed up to be support spaces. One is the old kitchen that can be renovated, and that is the plan, to renovate it for a support space of some sort. And the other is the place where the freezer is, the big commodity freezer that's over just past a social studies classroom by the bathroom there. That can be potentially, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't have a lot of natural light. But it's a space that'll be freed up. And then we have the steam room. So that's a real need that when we've eliminated these office projects, we've eliminated, you know, an extra office for a social worker that we plan on bringing on. We've eliminated an assessment space. We've eliminated a conference room. And so those are some key spaces that we were gaining in those projects to meet some real space crunch needs we have right now. So that's just something that the NCAP classrooms help with, that because, you know, we can push some things down there for the time being, some of those services potentially. But we, you know, so we could also accomplish that by doing one of the office projects to get, you know, at least one other support space to add it to the 2 that I mentioned in the old kitchen and the freezer room. So there are lots of things to think about. The thing that also you lose with the high school office being pulled out for now is there was going to be a really nice security upgrade there at that front door, with the same thing we're creating at ASA, of a kind of a vestibule approach where you come in the entry, the second set of doors is locked, there's a window, you speak to someone to get buzzed through. That's not to say we can't do that kind of project down the road. We can look at that when we talk about the capital improvement plan and think about how that might look in that kind of schedule of projects.
Yeah, the reason that I did not vote to put that on my list of 3 things I'd eliminate isn't so much because of the office concern in that renovation, which is real, right? But I would be okay with eliminating those, but I did not want to eliminate, and I do not want to eliminate that entry upgrade. So, I mean, if there would, one thing we might want to think about, and I don't know if it's doable, I would imagine it is, but we could at least ask PDT, is could we not do the office renovation, but still do the entry part of the renovation? What would that look like in terms of a number?
I think we could do that.
Yep.
As I think that's, that for me is an important piece, I think, so.
I mean, we were going to take that on as self-managed anyway.
Right.
And so if we scaled down the scope of the high school office renovation and just looked at, we have to do some swapping of who's sitting where and creating an office space in that front, but it's a lot less than 250,000 to do that.
I would be very interested in that.
I'll just add a couple more thoughts. So the difference where we're at, with those cuts, 16.6 versus 14.2, that's about, I don't have the exact number, but that's about $60 a year in difference in taxes on a average home for Orono. Not saying when you put the whole tax increase together, it's trivial or not something that I take very seriously, but the difference between those two numbers is about $60 a year in taxes, or about 0.3 of a mil. So that's just so that people know that the scoping we're at, the difference between if you take as done the things we've done, between 16.6 and 14.2, that's what we're talking about. I would also just say that for me, it's a struggle because I've been in the details of every line item, and I've seen Meredith and I've seen the real 500 line items that they got from the cost estimators that went into all this. But what I'm really trying to do is step back to the big picture, and for me, the big picture is about 20 years and flexibility. And so when I'm thinking about what can we cut, half of the question is, well, is it on the $100,000, $200,000 scale that we could conceivably tell ourselves that we're going to be able to do it out of our operating budget, although that operating budget's going to get pretty stressed pretty quickly. But at least it's a possibility. But the other factor is, are we preparing ourselves for having enough flexibility to get to 20 years from now, right? When you think about where we were 20 years ago and how everything has changed, sped's changed, right? Steam didn't exist 20 years ago. I mean, it existed obviously, but it wasn't a thing. Robotics as a class certainly didn't exist in middle schools and high schools 20 years ago. So I'm really trying to step back to the big picture, and I keep asking myself, are we buying flexibility for 20 years from now? And so it's easy to get down on the line items, but when I really start, to the extent we have to cut, that's kind of the rule I'm trying to take towards cutting is which of these things are buying flexibility for 20 years from now, as opposed to specific programs that we can imagine today or next year, but 20 years from now, do we still have flexibility? Is this increasing our flexibility or decreasing our flexibility? So, anything else people want to add before we move on? No?
I guess I just want to say that, at least from my perspective as a student, just getting to this level of considering this project and being this serious about it took a long time, and that I'm obviously not a taxpayer, and so I'm not on that side of things, but the idea of cutting a lot of things that we really need for our schools simply for that difference in money, I don't think that sits very well, because it took us a really long time to get here, and I don't know when, if ever, we're going to have that chance again. So at least from my perspective, it definitely feels like it's kind of we do it now, or it doesn't happen. We keep talking about pushing some things off down the road, and I obviously don't know the details of some of that, but at least from my perspective, I don't think we can safely assume that we can just push things down the road.
Thanks. Anything else? All right. Next up, we have just in-progress search, so we're not going to get very specific, but a quick update on the principal at the middle school search.
Yeah, so we had application review happen last week, and we're in the process of scheduling interviews. I haven't updated the committee this week because we've been pretty swamped with this, so this is information they haven't heard yet. We are interviewing 5 applicants at the top of next week, Monday and Wednesday. And then the plan is, after the committee interviews and if they identify finalists, then we will have the finalist visit with the staff and community Q&A session the top of the next week, starting April 1st is that Monday. And if the committee feels like we have a clear choice to recommend to the board and references check out, we definitely are trying to be on track to bring you a recommendation April 9th. But, we're in a position where we have time if things take longer than that. So that's where we are now. Any questions?
Okay.
And Jake and Aaron are on the committee, and we have 2 parents on the committee as well.
Great. Next up, we have the budget update. So I guess we have 4 documents in here. So we have our cover page, which I believe has not changed from last time, is that
It
correct?
has.
Oh, it has, okay. And we have seen this once, but the more detailed breakout by the 10 cost centers. And then we have our first guess at the end of FY19, this school year's budget. And then we have Meredith and the administrators put together, you know, just a list of small-scale maintenance kinds of things that have kind of built up. So there's 4 documents. You want to walk us through?
Sure. Len, will you come forward as well? So the one-page revenue to expenditure sheet, there is no change noted in revenue at this point, I believe. Len can correct me if I'm wrong. But there is just some slight change in expenditures that we're going to highlight on the next page. So overall, it went down. Last time, I think there was an increase of 6.06, and now it's, oh wait,
6.02.
yeah. So it went up.
No,
No, it went down.
went
Yeah.
down.
Sorry.
4% down.
Yeah, it went 4% down. Sorry, it's been a long day. And so there's some reasons for that we're going to highlight on the next page. So if you look at your detailed, the 3-pager, the first page on regular instruction, we, since you've seen this, we added in the detail of the halftime instructional coach, which resulted in the $22,000 increase of an impact to the local budget. Nothing else new there. In special education, you can see that that last item, we've added in a resource room teacher and removed 1 ed tech in that trade out, and that's at the middle school. So that's a net increase of $33,000. Incidentally, at the same time, Sharon's been on a hiring spree with some openings. She finally has, enough applicants to fill some ed tech openings that we've been needing to fill. And so we've made some adjustments to benefit projections, which actually netted, a positive for some savings. So there's a little bit of an offset between some of that increased expenditure and those actual benefit information, salary information. Also under number 4, Old Town has, and Mike Archer and we have, are recommending that we add a stipend for the hockey program. We'll bring you that full proposal with his rationale in the next meeting. But Old Town's has approved that. We think we need to go ahead and plan for it. And it's basically to accommodate for these big numbers that are coming up in the JV program, that they need another coach to be able to accommodate that. So we'll bring you that in the next meeting. Anything else, Lynn?
Nope, that's all the changes from the last time.
So, this is the document that I think next meeting, and we have some more things to talk about, but just quickly, next meeting, we should have insurance numbers in. We should have a better idea of our tuition students. And hopefully we're going to try to narrow in on what our international program revenue versus expenditure might look like. It's just a little bit up in the air right now exactly, so we've left everything as is. But I want us to make an adjustment next meeting that might be on track with what our best guess is at that point. So those are 3 things that at April 9th we will have some more maybe accurate, on 2 of those, probably pretty accurate information on the international program, maybe just a different forecast of that. And I think this is the page where these details are where, you can ask us to give you some guidance at that meeting. If you want us to work on, in the couple of years previous, we've been working on a prioritized list. If we had to make reductions, that's the kind of thing that tonight I'm wondering if you want us to start working on, because when we hit April 9th, that's the last meeting for us to make those kind of decisions, and the next board meeting, you approve a budget for us to begin to prepare warrant articles, so.
I would very much like to see that list of, if you have to make reductions, what would they be? And then Reg and or Lynn, the date you gave for students from the sending communities is when? Okay.
And our insurance number is expected, we're expected to get a, high-end number, probably in the next week or so, but April 1st
Is the real number.
is the real number.
Our loss ratio number didn't look great, so, but it's hard to predict what that means. Sue has kind of a historical, what our loss ratio was that they give us earlier and what our increase was, and there's not really a clear trend, because it depends on more than our loss ratio. It depends on the whole group as well, so
Right.
it's hard to predict.
We don't know what everyone else's loss ratio is,
Right.
so we don't know where we fit. And
So, do you have any questions about these first two documents before we move to the other two?
I had a couple thoughts. One actually is a question for you, Mark. Legislature, I mean, the ED 279 we have right now is from the governor's budget. There's been some grumbling from the Democrats about wanting to increase education more. Do you have any read on either whether that's likely or when that would come down?
No, but what my best guess is that even though there's a strong desire to do that they're going to be unwilling to buck a governor of their own party in her first budget, especially given that how she has managed to make this budget appear revenue neutral is dicey at best. And then also given the fact that there is now a strong possibility of having to repay $50 million in penalties and funds to the federal government at a DHHS. I'm sure there's a big appetite there to add in that additional money. I don't think it'll happen in this budget. I hope I'm wrong, but I certainly would not count on that. If that were to happen, I would think it would be sometime late April, early May, but I'm not holding my breath. I hope so, but I don't think it's gonna happen.
Okay.
And we just had a meeting and they were talking a lot of the bills that are out there, and a lot of them, the DOE is pushing that even if they pass, that it's in the next budget. They're really pushing to hold what they've sent out strong, no matter which way it affects us. So that they told us in that meeting that they're really pushing for that.
You might see some of that. You might see some stuff that gets pushed through, but it won't take effect till the next budget. That's certainly a possibility.
And that's already wired into the governor's budget too. I think it's $100 million increase next year and 40-something this year. The other one, so the teacher minimum at 40,000, I know that was just debated. Any guess on where that's headed?
It sounds to me that there's two strongish possibilities for where that might go. I think it's going to get approved. It's just a question of how you're going to pay for it, right? And it sounds like there's two possibilities on the table. I wouldn't begin to hazard a guess which of those two, but I think it has a good chance of going through.
If I certainly support paying our teachers well, but if history is any indication, they did this 10 years ago when they raised the floor to 30. They covered the cost for about 2 years and then they dumped it back on the towns. So
It looks like that is gonna.
What's that?
It will likely be a similar thing.
I would bet a lot of money that it's going to be the same thing. They'll cover it for a year or two, and then all of a sudden it's the town's obligation. So, which again is not a comment on what teachers deserve to be paid. It's a comment on how the state treats the towns and the schools. But I had a question, Meredith. So right now we moved from a half-time fifth grade teacher to an full-time ed tech because it was very hard to fill, but we also now have a half-time instructional coach. Is that the kind of thing that if we put together a half-time fifth, there's not a cost savings, I know, but this is more of a hireability kind of thing, a half-time fifth grade teacher and a half-time instructional coach? Would that be a more hireable position?
It's hard to know. It might be hireable. I think it just depends on the candidate pool. We could advertise the position as an instructional coach with part-time teaching responsibilities and see what the applicant pool yields, and then see if we think we can make that work, but it's hard to predict.
Okay, fair enough.
But yes, I think it's easier to put that with something.
Okay. Great. So I'll just frame for the board our tasks for April, right? We hope some of our revenues go up and some of our costs go down, but if they don't, we have choices of, the additional local fund tax number. We have choices about balance forward, and we have choices about cutting costs that are listed in the second document. So those are really the levers the board's gonna have. I mean, several of us expressed a desire to see that red number of 245 go to 0, but unless all the revenues line up perfectly and the insurance comes in perfectly, we're probably gonna be pushing some of those other levers. So those are the levers we have going forward. Any other comments or questions?
So we have these other.
Okay, yep, next two.
So, as we did last year, I asked Lynn to go through the exercise of trying to generate a projection, and she does. She was eager to get started.
Very, very early.
And I'm gonna ask Lynn to kind of share the information here on the projected end of year.
Yeah. So, as you know, this is not my favorite thing, but we do the best that we can, and I probably could change this every day before I brought it to you. And Meredith and I talk, and something happens, and she's like, "Oh, will that change your projection?" And yep, but so it will ever be changing. But right now, we're looking at a projected revenue higher than anticipated. That is mostly tuition. I think I had talked to you earlier about we had 4 elementary tuition students that we were not counting on, and we've had a couple more students actually move the opposite way than what's happened in the past. We've had a lot of tuition students move to Orono. We've had a few move from Orono to tuitioning towns, but stay with us. So that's why you see that number a little bit higher than what we had initially projected. Our expenditures right now, based on our projections, we would have a balance of $686,000. That has, our encumbrances as of now, things that we know are happening, contingencies that we're anticipating not using. But again, that's very fluid. That's counting, I think, I looked at $134,000 in extra special education tuition that we still haven't paid yet, that we're thinking we might need to pay. That could change every day. We could have another student come in, one of our students could move out. So, but that number is in there. So that gives us with a $686,000 balance in expenditures.
Are the extra sped positions also in those projected expenditures?
What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Yeah, those salary and benefits are included in the cost projections, yeah.
Well, yes and no. Their positions are in there, but they wouldn't, a sub or an open position doesn't encumber. So once they come in, but it's only be a few months at this point. So it does come out in the balance, but they're not exactly encumbered, if you understand what I'm saying there. So the system doesn't encumber them until you put a person's name in there and you set them in there.
Right.
But it's in the total budget, so it spits out at the end.
All right, let me ask it a different way. Are there any anticipated hires for the rest of this year that aren't in here?
We do. We have a couple of subs that waiting. Yeah.
And they're gonna roll into those positions as higher.
Right. But they're in the budget, so.
But those are determined.
Yeah.
Okay.
So did you include those in the planned expenditures?
No, I
Okay.
did not.
So that's something we can look at adjusting.
Right.
Yeah.
What, again, that's like something I say every day. There's no way for us to plan for it until it actually happens, because we don't even know what they're taking for insurances or anything like that until they actually are hired. because we don't get that information as a substitute, so.
And that's the main difference. I mean,
Yeah.
the salary amount is not as unpredictable as the.
Right, right.
Sorry, I interrupted you. Go
No,
ahead.
that's okay. So when we take our expenditure balance and what we're anticipating for overage in revenue, again, that's also predicting our special education revenue. The only thing we can do there is an average of what we've gotten so far this year and go along the same line. But one student moves, you know, we maybe don't have that much overage in our revenue. So, but between the two, that leaves us with a projected year-end balance of $788,000. Our carry forward was $777, so we have $11,000 that we'd be adding to our fund balance.
Great, this is helpful. And
Which is, yeah, it's, like I said, very early.
we haven't yet blamed you for having numbers that weren't exact yet, so.
I know. It's still stressful.
But
I
this
like
is
to be
really helpful.
accurate. But,
So I'm just gonna beat a dead horse and note that if we had a carry forward of 450,000 like we did 2 years ago, we would have raised taxes to put $320,000 in the bank. So, that's not something I wanna do. And
So related to that, you had asked, I think, what our payroll costs were for an average payroll. Just in
Yes.
thinking about, you know, what's the right amount to have in our unassigned balance. And the monthly average is around $875,000.
Okay. So 1.75 million would have a two-month payroll safety margin.
and that would be just payroll
Right,
And
Well,
benefits, yeah.
and benefits,
payroll and
right.
benefits, but
Yeah,
yeah, we would
that's
start to go past net 30 with vendors.
Right,
But if the state's not paying us for 2 months, maybe that's a reasonable thing to do.
right. I mean, you'd still have your electricity, those kind of things that you have to keep going, your food you still have to buy, those kind of things, but just looking at payroll, I mean, that's kind of like the big
Yep.
monkey in the room,
It's the one I would feel worst about not paying.
right.
So the other thing that kind of impacts this discussion about unassigned balance, what do we do? Do we move money into reserves? Do we increase our capital expenditure plans for our annual budget? With the help of Darren, Reg, Brent, Lynn, we sat down and put together, you know, for Asa Adams and Orono High School, because again, we're trying to get by with Orono Middle with minimal just repairs until we know more about state construction. So we're focusing this on Asa and Orono High School in areas where we know or project that the bond project will not provide any upgrades, renovations. And so came up with the start. There are definitely some things that we need to talk about in here, because it's very preliminary first draft round of what an annual kind of, 6 to 10 year plan might look like. So next year is the one that's a little more prepared and ready to go. We currently have, you see what we currently have in the budget right now. The 24,000 that's designated for a couple of those projects, 20,000 was for classroom improvements, and you can see kind of the ideas about what those might cover, and then 33,000 at ASA. So if we were to do all of this for FY20, which I have listed as 2019, sorry, I should have fixed that, we would need to have 36,000 more dollars either in the budget or from capital reserve to fund that. Incidentally, we also have some in the budget for OMS that I'm keeping kind of aside from this. So there's 10,000 in the budget for the middle school masonry repairs, and then some contingency, right, for just unanticipated needs at the middle school. And I think one classroom we're gonna address flooring.
Yes.
Yes. So that's next year's picture, but if you kind of play that out and see, if we're trying to move through all the classrooms and do the light touch, I described that last time. The light touch is the painting, the ceiling, improving lighting, furnishings, tech upgrades, flooring if needed, kind of looking at all of those things to see what's needed in each classroom. You can see that, over time, we're trying to get through all of the places in the school. There are a couple of places that have had a recent really light touch done. Like there was a construction project 2 summers ago down at Asa Adams that had 2 classrooms really getting a light touch, so those aren't in this plan. But there are a lot of other places, classrooms, and then some common areas. The other thing that you see is, like for the 2020, which is the FY21 budget, Reg put in library renovation, you know, thinking if that doesn't make it in the bond, you know, maybe we can put that in 1 year. That year, it definitely bumps up our amount. If you look over kind of a 6-year average for what's listed here, the 6-year average is about $165,000 per year to get through all of the things listed. There's some things not listed, like a couple of things that ASA that we really would have to, we need to know a little more about to put some price tags to and to figure out what that might look like. They're listed there. A kind of a hallway retrofit at ASA with lighting and wall work. And then the library Fab Lab renovation, we needed just a little more information to figure out what to put there. Also not included here, you know, if we removed Orono High School and did it as a office and did it as a locally funded project, you know, that's potentially something that could be added to this plan. And central admin the same. Concession building the same, concession building restrooms. So, you know, this is a 6-year plan. If you push this out to a 10-year plan, you know, you might be able to fit in those other elements, still staying within an average of maybe, you know, $175,000 to $200,000 a year in the local budget to support these things. So that's kind of a first pass at looking at what we can accomplish and what the timeline would be for that. You know, I think there's a real concern that with the 14 million, we're getting some really key things, but there are a lot of places that aren't going to be touched by that level of bond, because we knew that a full retrofit renovation of the facility costs a lot more than 14 million. And so this is a way to, you know, ensure that our buildings are maintained in a way that keep them, you know, having great learning spaces for students, and that they don't become, you know, another down the road, we haven't paid attention to this and we're kind of in a dire situation with it. But I think this plan needs some work. That's why we put preliminary in front of it. But I wanted to just give you an idea, since we were really trying to hone in on, you know, how might we use unassigned, and what can the budget bear on this. And I think one of the things that would be useful or important for us to look at is, you know, considering once we take on a bond, you know, what do we think we can maintain in the budget for this kind of work?
We have right now for this kind of construction about 80,000.
Right now in the budget, it's about,
That's it.
well, it's 113 minus 20,000. So about, does that sound right? What we have in the budget right now this year for this kind of work, isn't it about 85,000?
Well, you have, it's the 33 plus the 20.
But there's middle school stuff. There's like 15,000 in middle school. There's some more contingency in each. I guess we shouldn't count contingency.
No, we shouldn't count contingency,
So-
but for this type of product, I think it's the 33, the 20, and the 24 plus
So 85,000.
probably,
The OMS
12.
masonry work.
yeah, for the middle school.
So 85,000.
Okay. So we're looking at roughly $100,000 increase.
I think this is a great start on this, and I thank you for doing it. I do think that we're gonna need to, obviously add some things. I think the high school office project and also the central admin, I mean, I don't know, I suppose they could still end up in the bond, so we can't figure that out until we decide, but I think that's probably gonna have to end up in here. I also think it would be worth, I don't see anything on here, regarding, kind of athletic fields, and we know that really the only field that's getting addressed as it stands right now under the bond is the competition football, occasional soccer field. So I would, you know, ask Mike to, you know, kind of think about areas that he thinks are going to need to be addressed, whether that's fields or locker rooms or anything that he thinks would need. Cause I'd like to fold that in here too. But I think this is a great start, and I mean, speaking just for me as a board member, I think it's something we really have to commit to. Even though we know our budgets are gonna get tighter, our flexibility is gonna go down with hopefully, you know, not that I'm hoping for big payments, but I want a bond to pass, and we know that our flexibility is gonna go down, but one thing we can't do is put off these. I mean, I think we need to commit. This is what we're gonna do. We put a plan like this together, it's great, and then we do it. And if we have to pinch other places, maybe other places get pinched a little bit so we can do this for, you know, a concerted effort over a number of years and knock some of this stuff out. So thank you for putting it together.
I mean, I would agree. I think it's hard to be a board member having gone through this whole process and not come out with a commitment to maintain our facilities at a higher level than we have in the past. And, you know, we're not, other than the bond, we're not talking huge chunks of money to do this. And, you know, sometimes you can be penny wise, pound foolish when you don't invest in your buildings. So I certainly support it. There's certainly a conversation about how to fund it, because we could fund 2 or 3 years of it by drawing down our account, but after that, it's gonna have to hit back to the operational budget. And whether that's the right strategy to kind of set that up or not is a conversation probably for later. I'll just express, so I fully support doing this, and I think we have to find the money somewhere. I will just express a concern, I remember on the bond, being on the board 3-4 years ago, Mark and Jake, you might remember this too, we had started ramping up the facilities construction budget, and we found it very hard to actually spend that money. Partly because we were keeping it all concentrated to the summers, partly because we have one person in facilities right now. So I want to make sure we think through that we actually have the capacity, and you know, if we don't, does that mean that there's a staffing need that sits behind this too? Because I do remember pretty clearly for several years we had a hard time spending the money that we'd budgeted when we were up at these levels previously. So
was that pre-facilities director though? I believe it was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we've had some issues since, but the bigger
but
concerns were pre-creation of that position. So I think it's a good point.
It is a good point. And like I said, there are a couple of different ways you can do it. You can do it through the budget, or you can do it through the reserves, which, you know, say we moved, the way it would be different is if you moved money over to the reserve account and you don't spend it, it still stays in the capital reserve. It doesn't spit back into the unfunded. It stays in the capital reserve for capital reserves to continue to do that project later. Whereas when you put it in a budget and you don't get to that project, it spits back out into the unfunded. And you can't do it in the next year unless you've put it back in your budget to be approved again.
No, I'm open to the reserve.
Reserve
is a load leveling, but the notion that we can just spend our bank account down to cover the next 10 years of capital is not true either, though.
Right, no, because it's really not that high.
A couple of things. One of the things that Britt and I have had a lot of conversations tonight, and if I misspeak, please feel free to come to the mic and correct that. But one of the things that Brent said would be really key to being able to accomplish an aggressive amount of work during the summer is being able to plan for that pretty far in advance. And so one of the challenges is when we wait until, does it make it in the budget? We don't know until May. It's late to line up contractors during a very busy, competitive time of year at that point. So if we had this long-term plan that we knew in January that he can go out to bid for stuff that's going to be starting in June, it really makes it a lot easier to accomplish even aggressive amount of work in the summer. And then secondly, I think that some combination, at least initially, of local budget plus capital reserve might be a nice way to start until we know more about what's happening in the bond. And also when we see what happens on the other side of the bond work, do we have some money remaining from the contingencies to take care of a couple of projects that we hope to be able to do, and we can take care of, several $100,000 worth of work potentially from remaining contingencies. I mean, that's painting, the best possible scenario of what might happen, but it's possible that that's the case. And so we can, adjust as needed when we see what happens with the other side of the planned bond work as it wraps up. So I guess in my mind, I'm thinking it would be nice to start out with $100,000 in our budget and $100,000 from capital reserve. We use what's in our budget first, and then we move into capital reserve and accomplish everything we can, and then, you know, we reevaluate that each year. So that's just one idea for a way we could move forward without, you know, bringing down that balance too dramatically at first.
What are we gonna have in?
Can I just interrupt just for a second?
Yeah, the student reps, if you would like to go, you're obviously released. You're welcome to stay if you want to. And thank you again for your service for the past year.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm trying to remember.
Your nameplates. Yeah.
Yeah.
Leave the name plate, but with your name.
Trying to remember what we're gonna have in the capital reserve fund after we finish paying through the,
Not much.
Not much, yeah.
Right? Do you remember?
I just looked at that today too.
I'm thinking it's more like, it's like 50 or,
Yeah, it's not much.
yeah.
Not a lot.
So it would have to come out of the savings account.
Right, we'd have to
Or-
transfer something more over.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me, so that there's this short-term issue of maybe we want to draw down the savings account, and maybe we do, or maybe we don't. I mean, maybe we have contingency for the project, but maybe we're in the opposite direction. We find out we're $400,000 short on the project. We hope it's the first, and we're planning for the first, but, so, yeah, I agree, the short-term is kind of tricky waters to navigate, but strikes me long-term, and picking up on what you said, maybe the best solution would be to have 2 years of funds in the reserve account, you know, kind of as a policy that we're trying to have 2 years in the reserve account, and that way Brent knows that he automatically has the next summer lined up the second we come out of the vote.
I think that's a good idea.
And so we kind of are a year ahead of the budget cycle, so that Brent does, because you're right, we've kind of said, oh, in June, here's this extra project, and I know nobody wants to line up a contractor in June that has to have a project done by August 15th. So there's a complex conversation about the short term between carry forwards and bank accounts and bonds and about a bunch of other stuff, but long term, having a 1 or 2 year amount sitting in the reserve that we we spend a year and we refresh a year every year seems to me like a very nice, and if we want to take on a bigger project, then we have that second year of reserve. That seems to me like a long-term target that might make sense. Getting to that point, yeah, there's a lot of pieces on the table right now, but long-term, that seems to me like a healthy place to be. Other thoughts on the budget? Maintenance or anything else?
Question, not related to maintenance, but related to budget. Did we find out what the story is with the Montessori school, and if we can expect any students from that? Did we look into that?
Yes, they're staying open through the remainder of this year, and we don't have any new information other than what we had last meeting, which was they expected us to have some kindergarten enrollments, and then one third grader, I think, was, and that's pretty much all we know right now. But that's still developing, I would say.
But they are staying open
Through the rest of this school year, yeah.
And budget-wise, that's actually, they're not gonna show up until our October 2019 count, which won't show up in funds to us until FY21. So basically, it's like everything with the state, we have to cover for a year until they catch up, so. But in terms of whether we have to add teachers with those kinds of numbers, it doesn't sound like we're in that situation at the moment.
The only exception to that would be, I think there was a possibility of a couple unorganized territory kids. And if they choose to come here, then we get tuition for those students in the year that they come from the Montessori. So they did have a couple. That third grader that we were talking about, I think that's the case, that they're not an Orono resident, that they are unorganized territories, but their plan right now is to choose, because they can choose anywhere they want. And the state pays their tuition. That's what unorganized territories means. So that would be the only time that it would really hit us in the year that they come.
Any further comments, I guess, from Reg, Darren, or Brent about this information on the capital improvement plan? Sharon, okay.
Anything else from the board on any budget topic? Okay, next up, I had asked that we have a conversation about stipend review. I love to see new programs, but I also know as an organization, if you don't have death that matches birth, you're going to end up just bloating. So on every program that's active and got lots of kids, I'm not looking to cut. That's not what that's about. But Meredith had some suggestions about how to proceed on that, so
Yeah.
you want to present that?
Yeah, we had talked in stipend committee meeting last time we met about two things, and one of those is the evaluation, and we've moved forward on that and are working through that this spring. And I think that's a really one of the key points on kind of evaluating where the programs are, the level of activity. But also, I am asking someone in our office to collect data to add to our kind of spreadsheet about our stipends in terms of student involvement, so the numbers of participants. And so that's data that we'll collect and we'll probably have within the within the month. We'll be able to share that data back with the stipend committee and with the board. And the stipend committee does meet one more time this year. So I don't know that I don't think we'll have that data in time for that meeting. We'll just, because that's coming right up. Yeah. So,
Is it scheduled yet?
it is.
No, it is, yeah, it's April.
This is why you don't make the meetings, Aaron.
And I'll check out more.
I wrote Jake last time, on the day of.
So those are the two things that we're doing to collect some data on that, the evaluation and on student participation. And I'll share the student participation number when we have that.
Can I get added to the calendar so I know where and when to go? That's right.
So Shauna does a great job of informing the committee, and so will you add Jeff to your distribution?
Awesome,
Yeah,
thank you.
I wanted to be clear that this is not Shauna, why I don't know when the meeting is. It's
She had a few snowstorms this year that threw some, trouble into things. Don't control the weather.
Does that sound like a constructive step to the board for review?
Good start.
Yeah, again, I'm not looking to kill programs that kids are in, but when we have 300,000 in stipends and we've added, I don't know what it is, 6 or 7 stipends, and it's here in the budget document how much we're looking at adding, over 10,000 in new stipends to the budget for new programs that were in trial this year. It's certainly not sustainable to just go one direction on those, so, and I would find it hard to believe there's not a single stipend that hasn't, regressed and could potentially be cuttable. Okay, any other comments on the stipend process? Next up, we have co-curriculars. So we have a slate of nominations. I'll read the slate. So varsity basketball, these are baseball, sorry, all at the high school. Yes. So we have varsity baseball, Don Joseph, JV baseball, Tomo Ebihara, varsity softball, Kristen Espling, varsity tennis, Matt Murray, JV tennis, Zach Arnold, varsity track, Chris Libby, assistant track, Steve Dexter, Lynn White, and Miguel Caballero, canoe club, Jeff Owen, spring play, drama, Cami Carter, halftime, Dan Perkins, halftime, and drama spring play tech, John Hawley. So I would make a motion to approve the slate as presented. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Do we have, I'm assuming not enough student athletes interested for a JV softball team? Is that why there's no position for that?
I haven't heard the total number, but that's probably it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? All those in favor? Okay, next up we have policies. So first one up is, this is a first read. Definitely not trying to rush this through because there's been a lot of conversation. We've actually talked about it at the last 2 board meetings, or the last 2 curriculum committee meetings. I think the policy committee sat down and found it was perhaps surprisingly easy to incorporate the views. So this is not a policy that exists anywhere. It's not, we don't have a draft from MSMA. I created this language after looking at policies from a bunch of other states. And it's got 3 sections. So section A describes the different scenarios in which a student could be taking classes up at the high school, classes at the high school. Scenario 1 is they physically go up to the high school. Scenario 2 is basically, you can think of it as the Algebra 2 scenario, where there's a large cohort. So Algebra 2, which is normally only at the high school, will now be also taught at the middle school for a year, as long as there's a cohort need. Scenario 3 is the one that I think there's probably, within the policy committee, more discussion. We leaned eventually towards crossing it out in a sense of incrementalism, but it could come back, I think, in the future. But this would be something, I would call it the Algebra 1 scenario, where it's a class that is taught at the high school, but also is regularly, both in this district and other districts, taught at the middle school. Criteria about who gets to decide who goes into these classes. And section B is requiring equivalence of the courses, has to have a teacher certified at the high school level. The syllabi have to be closely aligned, and the summative test, aka the final exam, has to be the same. If they're not met, they can be used for placement into a higher course, but not for credit. And the third clause is, I would call it the student interest clause, which says if a middle school student is in any of the scenarios in A, the course will still always appear on their middle school transcript. At the end of the halfway point of the course, so a quarter for a half credit course or a semester for a 1 credit course, after the grade for that is posted, the parents and the student will have to make a decision whether to take it for high school credit or not. We'll get that signed form that they know about the consequences. And if they opt in, then they will get credit, and it will appear on their transcript and count towards the graduation credits. If they opt out, it will not appear on their high school transcript at all. It's just a middle school grade. And regardless of whether it's taken for credit, it doesn't count towards the high school GPA or class rankings or awards. And the intention would be for this to take effect in the next school year, so starting September 2019. So I would make a motion to recognize a first read of this policy. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion, comments, or questions on this? We will look at this again in the policy subcommittee.
So can you answer how many students either request or opt for a course before a course is normally offered at Orono Middle School? If we had one student who was ready to take trig, we had a teacher that was qualified to do it, would we offer that, or would we have the kid walk up the hall and sit in a trig class?
We've been having the kid walk up the hall for those kinds of scenarios. The Algebra 2 scenario, was it 15 kids? So 15 to 17? So that's the case where we're offering a course at the middle school. So, yeah, otherwise, why would take advantage of the fact that it's the same building and just let them go up the...
So we don't have a cut point, though. We're looking at it as case-by-case basis.
Case-by-case, yeah. Approximately the size of a regular middle school class, I think, would be the threshold.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, there's downsides of that, right? If once they go up to the high school for 1 class, they have to go up to the high school for 2 classes because of the way the maroon white works. But of course, there's a downside for offering a course for 1 or 2 kids as well in terms of cost.
I think one of the things that we've had a lot of discussion across, throughout a process with this, and we had good discussion over 2 meetings at policy meeting. And I think what this policy reflects is an incremental kind of approach to making an adjustment that kind of recognizes coursework that is traditionally taught at the high school should receive high school credit, but also doesn't do it in a way that is impactful of GPA class rank in the long run for students who might not understand and get all the implications of that when they're in 7th or 8th grade. So I think it ended up in a good place for kind of if there's a middle ground, this policy would be it.
I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into giving kids the option to try, right? We want them to shoot high and not be penalized for that. I think, I don't want to repeat questions I've had before. I did raise before a question about the summative assessment. I think it's important to have. I'm glad that's in there. I wonder how comfortable middle school teachers are accepting a summative assessment that they have no input into, or little input into, or how comfortable high school teachers are writing summative assessments for students they may not instruct. I have no opinion on that. I just think those are questions that we should ask our faculty. Yeah.
Reg can maybe answer this. Do the high school math teachers, for example, because that's one of the places where this is impacting the most, give common final exams? If 2 teachers teach Algebra 2, do they give a common exam, or does each teacher write their own?
They do work together often to develop
Yeah.
it, but it's not necessarily the exact same, so.
Yeah, so that would be something that would have to be developed then for this policy, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point, Jeff. It doesn't really describe the process by which that summative assessment is written. I guess I would kind of hope that there's some consultation in both directions, and it's not just a case of, the higher grade handing it down to the lower grade, but on the other hand, the goal is to make sure that it's matching the high school standards, so. But I hope there's a consultative process around B3, so.
So I'm just looking for some clarification around C3 regarding, so it sounds like if the middle school student takes the high school class, whether they decide to take it for credit or not, it's not going to be used in the calculation of their high school GPA or awards and rankings. Is that right?
That's right.
So is that something, and part of this is because I don't have a kid in that age range yet. So when colleges look at their high school transcript or whatever it is, that won't show up at all? Or, I mean, because it's all right for us not to, personally as a district, it's okay for us not to calculate it for the GPA or the class ranking, but if a collegiate institution can still look at that and have a negative effect that way, that somewhat concerns me.
That's a possibility. It shows, so if they opt in under C2A, then it's going to show up on the transcript. And a lot of colleges completely ignore the GPA that the high school calculates and recalculate their own formulas. And there's all kinds of variations about AP courses counting for more or not counting for more. I think if you looked at 100 colleges, they recalculate the GPA in 100 different ways. So it is true, it's a risk that it will potentially for some colleges get calculated, if they throw away our GPA or our class rank. Well, they can't throw away our class rank because they don't have all the students, but they could throw away our GPA and count it. So that's a risk I think that parents need to be aware of. I think the biggest thought around this was just a stress pressure kind of thing. The high school doesn't give just an A, B, or a C. They give a percent, so a 98.2. And kids within the school are very concerned about who has the 98.2 and the 98.4. And so we're at least alleviating that problem, that if the kid was bold and took the high school course when they were in middle school, it's not going to affect them at that level. But you are absolutely right that there is still some downside potential issue with the college. But again, 100 colleges are going to calculate this 100 ways. Many of them will respect our wishes and many won't.
So obviously, I would assume that kids in the middle school who are taking high school classes would be eligible, they'd get their required high school coursework out of the way early, not that they would graduate early, but that would leave them with extra time for other electives or so forth. How does it work now if a middle school student takes a high school class, gets a grade on it, and then when they get up to high school, they have extra time and retake that and get a higher grade? Do both those grades stay on the transcript, or does one wipe out the other, or how's that work?
So we don't have policy around credit forgiveness right now, and when I asked Troy about it, it's a very it's not a simple answer to your question as to how that works. But right now, for the most part, if someone retakes a course, both grades stay on the transcript. But in this situation, they've taken the class before. If they retake it now for the grade will stand on the transcript in high school. If they took Algebra 1 in middle school, or took Algebra 2 in middle school, and then decided to take it again in ninth grade, the ninth grade would be the grade on the transcript, because there wouldn't be any grade from middle school. But I would also say, relative to your first question, that colleges can look at a high school transcript and see, wow, this ninth grader started in geometry and then progressed to, trig and pre-cal. So they know, they can, recognize that advanced coursework was taken in the middle school that might not be reflected on a high school transcript. So they're kind of used to having to puzzle together things like that. And on some college applications, there's a place where you can, write some explanation about certain elements like that might be a little different on your transcript. So I think that colleges are used to having to interpret things, because practices vary widely across high schools and middle schools. So I don't think that not having it on the high school transcript puts students at a disadvantage for colleges, like assuming the class wasn't taught or something, so, or taken.
I would just second that, having been through a college admissions process and heard 10 different college admissions officers tell kids what matter, and what they always stress is that taking challenging courses is more important than a few decimal places on the GPA. So I think, if it was my kid, I would probably encourage them to go ahead and get that course on their transcript, because I think that's something colleges do actually pay a lot of attention to. They like to know, is this a kid who challenges themselves academically? So that shows up.
Did you have something to add to that, Reg, about the forgiveness question?
No, except typically, that's a rare situation that a kid at the high school, the way you describe it as, maybe they took it in 8th grade, say Algebra 2, but they took it again in high school, that's not uncommon. But it's uncommon for a student to be in the high school, get a low grade, let's say an English class, and decide to retake that class for a higher grade. That's rare. Typically, if they pass, they move on and retake it unless there's some extenuating circumstance.
And then sometimes it's through, virtual school, online. Yeah.
This will come back. Any requested changes or other comments?
We have one kind of editing change that will, if it stays as it stands under B, it currently says under scenarios number 2 and 3, but we've removed 3, so it should just say under scenario number 2.
Okay, yep. Anything else? Okay, so we have a motion to recognize a first read. We do take votes on that, so all those in favor of recognizing a first read? Okay. Next up, we have GBGE. This is a second read, so we would be adopting it tonight. We have not changed it from the MSMA default policy. As we discussed several weeks ago, we get credit with our workman's comp. While there's a list of things you have to do to have best practices, this is the last thing on the list we haven't done. So this would earn us some credit on the workman's comp. I think the union thinks this is a good idea too. It's just a win all around, right? It's just making things not binary that you're home or you're at full work. It gives us an option to have an intermediate level. So I would make a motion to adopt policy GBGE. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, now we can get that workman's comp credit. And GCOC, as I mentioned before, if you're having deja vu, we did deal with this, I don't know, 2 years ago. We got halfway into this, and then we had to find a superintendent, and we got distracted in other directions. We never did come back to this. We have now run it through policy committee, made a couple of additional changes, which are the things I think you see in blue, and the policy committee is now happy with this and recommending that we adopt it. So I would make a motion to adopt policy GCOC. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any questions or comments? It's just implementing current practice that we already do, but it's just updating the policy. Any other questions? All those in favor? Okay. That takes us through policies. Subcommittee reports. Policy Subcommittee. We will revisit the IKEB, and we're working through a systematic review of policies. We'll just a couple of optional B policies, board policies. Section B is about the board that we'll discuss. Some of those may come forward, and then we may start work on the question about religious holidays and students and calendars. So that's what's up for the April Policy Subcommittee meeting. UTC?
We haven't met since the last time.
Spruce?
Yeah, we have a meeting coming towards the end.
Okay, Curriculum Subcommittee, we postponed this month to have a second Policy Subcommittee meeting, but we will be back on schedule in April. Facilities, we've talked about that a lot. I don't think there's anything more to say. Wellness Subcommittee?
Nothing new.
Okay. Any other proposed business? Any requests for future agenda items?
Just a question, when do we have to approve the calendar?
I'm bringing that to the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at a change with graduation that we've now confirmed that we need to do and can do with the Collins Center just because of the way the calendar falls and required dates for seniors next year. So,
I just wanted to make sure.
yeah, I plan to bring it next meeting.
Any other future agenda requests? Any more public comment? Date and time of next meetings. Public meeting on Thursday at 6 p.m. We hope everybody in the town is there.
Have enough seating if everyone comes.
It would be a nice problem to have.
And we'll have food.
Yep. This board will meet here Friday at 5 p.m. to really where the rubber hits the road on the bond. And then we have our next regularly scheduled board meeting Tuesday, April 9th, at which we will have a serious near-final budget discussion.
If I could just add, I forgot to mention this earlier, on Thursday night, we will have childcare, thanks to National Honor Society and Ms. Goodall for offering that service. So I'll put that note out on Facebook as well, but pass the word.
Yep, that's good to get around. Any requests for information or follow-up? All right, I would motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor? Okay.